She wasn't a hero, not anymore. At least, that's what the cadets whispered when she passed. Just another kitchen worker in a faded apron, hair tied back, smile too polite to mean anything. They didn't know that beneath the sleeves of that plain uniform were scars that told stories in silence. That her steady hands once stopped bleeding men from slipping away in the dust of Kandahar. No, to them, she was just Maya from the mess hall, the one who served pie every noon without looking up. But that would all change the moment a decorated colonel walked through those cafeteria doors and said 8 words that froze every spoon in midair. Before we begin, if you believe that real courage doesn't always wear a uniform, make sure to like and subscribe. Because what happens next will remind you that valor never fades. It just finds quieter rooms to live in. It was the start of training week at Jefferson Military Academy, the air thick with the arrogance of youth and fresh starch. Cadets thundered through the halls, their boots echoing like thunderclaps of purpose, while in the corner of the mess hall, Maya Dawson moved quietly from tray to tray, serving slices of warm apple pie like it was sacred duty. She was 28, small-framed but unshakably composed, the kind of woman who never wasted a gesture. She always stood perfectly straight, shoulders back, as if invisible weight pressed her spine to attention. To most, she was a mystery with flour on her hands. To a few, a curiosity. And to herself, she was a promise kept, a vow made on a battlefield she still visited every night in dreams. Maya rarely spoke beyond the simple phrases that kept the line moving. Next, please. Enjoy your meal. Careful, it's hot. Her voice carried a calmness that made people slow down without knowing why. But behind her gentle tone lived a soldier's reflex. The way her eyes flicked automatically toward exits. How she seemed to count every head in the room without ever turning. No one noticed except one cadet, Eli Brooks, 19, new to the academy and still clumsy with his salute. He couldn't help but notice that she never flinched when trays crashed or when someone dropped a plate. Most people blinked, startled. She didn't. She just turned her head slightly, measuring distance, calculating noise, like someone who'd heard far worse. Around her, chatter carried the casual cruelty of the confident. You think she's one of those military brats who couldn't cut it? One cadet muttered loud enough to be heard. Probably took this job because her dad's in supply. Another laughed. Nah, look at her, too soft for combat, maybe logistics at best. Maya heard every word, but she didn't react. She just smiled that quiet smile and set another slice of pie on a tray. Eli caught the exchange and felt something twist inside him. There was nothing soft about the way she moved. It was discipline disguised as grace. That afternoon, sunlight filtered through the high windows, painting golden stripes across the mess hall floor. Maya took a moment between shifts, resting her hands on the counter. She traced the faint groove in her left wrist, where a medical bracelet once hung, and for a second her expression faltered, a flicker of memory flashing behind calm eyes. A blast. Sand. Screams muffled under helmet static, then the sound of metal twisting in the wind. She blinked, and the mess hall returned. The clatter of trays replaced the sound of mortars. Her breath steadied. Keep moving, Dawson, she whispered under her breath, the same way she used to say it to herself when the nights got too long. Later that week, the academy buzzed with news. A decorated colonel was visiting to give a leadership talk. Colonel Nathaniel Rhodes, legendary in every circle, survivor of 3 tours, now retired but still sharp as steel. The cadets couldn't stop talking about him, rehearsing questions they hoped might impress him. Maya listened quietly from behind the serving line as they boasted, amused but detached. She had heard that name before, though it took a moment to place it. Somewhere deep in the buried years of her service file, that name had been typed once, signed at the bottom of a report she'd never been meant to see. By noon, the mess hall gleamed. Flags hung freshly pressed, tables lined in perfect symmetry. Maya adjusted the trays with surgical precision, ensuring everything was in order. When the double doors finally opened and the colonel entered, the room instinctively stiffened. The man was broad-shouldered, silver-haired, his uniform still fitted like it remembered command. He nodded to the officers, exchanged formal greetings, then walked toward the counter where Maya stood, ready to serve the guest table first. And then, something happened. The colonel froze mid-stride, his expression shifting from formal composure to disbelief. His eyes locked on Maya, narrowing in recognition, then widening in shock. The entire hall quieted as he set his tray down slowly, almost reverently. The silence deepened, stretching so long that even the cadets felt it. Something electric, something reverent. Finally, he spoke, voice trembling but steady. "Corporal Dawson?" Every head turned. The cadets glanced at each other, confused. "Corporal? The woman with the apron?" Maya looked up, caught his gaze, and for the first time all day, her smile disappeared. "Sir," she said softly. One word. Formal. Acknowledgement. Respect meeting respect. The colonel's hands trembled as he took a half step forward, emotion cracking through his composure. "You're alive," he breathed. You saved my life in Kandahar." The mess hall froze. Trays clattered onto tables, utensils stilled midair. Eli's heart hammered as he turned toward her, seeing not a cafeteria worker, but a soldier suddenly standing where she'd always been. The colonel kept speaking, voice thick with awe. "I remember the blast, the dust, the fire. We were pinned. My driver was hit, radio dead. And then you came out of nowhere, dragging me by the vest, yelling orders like you outranked God himself." Maya's jaw tightened. She seemed uncomfortable with the attention, her voice quiet but firm. "I did what anyone would have done, sir." But Rhodes shook his head. "No, you did what no one else could. You pulled 3 of us out under fire. They said you never made it back after the second explosion. We thought." He stopped, swallowing hard. "We thought we lost you." Eli looked around. The same cadets who'd laughed days earlier now stared at her in stunned silence. One whispered, "She was there." Another murmured, "Kandahar. That was the rescue op they study in doctrine class." The colonel straightened, his voice ringing out with quiet pride. "That woman isn't just a cook. She's a medic, a soldier, and a hero. And every one of you owes her your respect." Maya looked down at the counter, her hand still resting near the pie she'd been serving moments earlier. A soft smile returned, fragile but sincere. "With all due respect, sir," she said gently, "these cadets don't owe me anything. I'm just here to make sure they get fed before they save the next generation." For a moment, no one spoke. The colonel nodded slowly, blinking away the memory of sand and smoke. "Still humble," he murmured. "Still the same Dawson." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was reverent. Every cadet who met her eyes now saw not a kitchen worker, but a legacy standing behind the counter, alive and breathing in front of them. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Jefferson, when Maya said, "Next, please," the next cadet stood at full attention before taking his tray. Outside, the noon sun poured through the windows, warm and golden, but inside, the air felt different, like the walls themselves had remembered how to honor something. And as Maya quietly cleared the counter, the faintest reflection of her past flickered in the sheen of the metal tray. The medic's armband she no longer wore, the dust she'd long since washed away, and the courage that never really left, only learned how to serve in silence. The next morning, the mess hall carried a silence different from the usual morning clatter, a silence that spoke of words unspoken and eyes newly opened. The cadets, who once joked freely over their breakfasts, now watched Maya Dawson with a kind of hesitant reverence, as if they were suddenly aware that every slice of pie, every measured motion of her hand, carried weight far beyond what they could see. The story had spread across the academy like wildfire overnight. The kitchen worker who'd pulled soldiers from burning wreckage in Kandahar, the medic whose name had been buried beneath classified files and sand. No one knew how she'd ended up here, serving meals instead of serving in uniform, but no one dared to ask. Even the loudest cadets from before now stood straighter when she passed, unsure if they should salute, whispering her name like it meant something sacred. Maya said nothing about the day before, just showed up, same time, same calm expression, same quiet rhythm of work. But even her silence seemed to hum with gravity. Colonel Rhodes hadn't left after his speech. He'd canceled his remaining engagements and returned to the mess hall at dawn, arriving before most cadets were awake. When Maya walked in, he was already there, seated alone at a corner table, a man who had once commanded hundreds waiting quietly for the woman who once saved him. She paused at the door, surprise flickering across her face, but he simply smiled, gesturing to the seat opposite him. "You disappeared, Dawson," he said softly when she sat down. "We searched for months. You were listed as MIA after the convoy ambush. Command thought you'd been taken. Maya shook her head. No, sir. Just transferred to the Med Corps in Germany. They discharged me when I couldn't run without pain anymore. It was easier to vanish than to explain why I couldn't go back. Her voice never wavered, but there was something brittle underneath, a quiet ache she had long since learned to live with. The colonel's eyes softened. You saved me, and I didn't even know if you were alive to thank you. When the cadets filed in later that morning, the sight of a full-bird colonel sitting at a small table in the corner of the mess hall was enough to stop them in their tracks. But what truly caught their breath was the way he stood the moment Maya approached with his meal tray. She tried to wave him off, insisting she wasn't on duty to be served, but he held firm, taking the tray from her hands and setting it down himself. Not today, he said. Today we serve you. The cadets stared, dumbfounded. A few officers looked on from the doorway, unsure of the protocol for what they were witnessing, but the colonel didn't care for appearances. He simply took a seat again, folded his hands, and nodded toward the counter where Maya usually stood. You built this place without even knowing it, he said quietly. Every lesson I've ever taught about leadership came from that day you pulled us out. I told them courage is calm under fire, but you showed them what it looks like. For the first time since she'd returned to civilian life, Maya looked genuinely uncertain. Her hands fidgeted slightly with the hem of her sleeve. I'm not that person anymore, she said softly. I just serve food. Rhodes shook his head slowly. You serve something far more important than that. He gestured subtly toward the cadets, who had stopped eating, eyes glued to the quiet exchange between legend and myth come to life. You remind them that leadership doesn't end when the fighting does. It keeps showing up, even in aprons and kitchen shoes. Maya smiled faintly, shaking her head, but the warmth in her eyes said she understood. The colonel stood then, and in a voice that filled the hall without needing volume, said, Attention. Every cadet rose instinctively, trays forgotten, posture snapping upright. He looked around the room and then to her. This woman, he said, dragged me and two others through fire while bleeding herself. I would not be standing here if not for her. The words landed heavy and still. She may not wear a uniform now, but make no mistake, she is the finest soldier I've ever known. Maya exhaled quietly, caught between pride and embarrassment, but she didn't protest. She only gave a small nod, eyes down, shoulders straight. The colonel saluted. Slowly, one by one, the cadets followed suit, an unbroken line of raised hands and bowed heads until the room was filled with this soundless unity of respect. When the moment passed, Maya returned to her post, quietly setting out lunch trays as if nothing monumental had happened. Yet, from that day on, every cadet who approached her counter did so with a crisp stance and a quiet ma'am. They didn't just see a woman who served pie. They saw a warrior who never stopped serving. And though Maya would later laugh softly when people asked why she stayed in the mess hall, her answer never changed. Because soldiers still need someone watching their six, she'd say, sliding another tray forward. Even if it's just at lunchtime. Weeks passed, and life at Jefferson Military Academy began to settle again, but nothing truly returned to how it was before. The mess hall still buzzed with laughter and clinking trays, but beneath the noise lived a quiet reverence, a kind of unspoken order that no officer had to enforce. The cadets who once mocked Maya Dawson now greeted her first, their voices softer, their shoulders squared as they took their meals. They lingered longer near the counter, some asking small questions about field medics, some just saying thank you. She never made a spectacle of herself, never corrected them, never confirmed the stories that grew around her name. She simply kept serving with that same steady grace, same faint smile, same eyes that saw everything without judgment. And though she never mentioned Kandahar again, everyone knew her presence carried something sacred, the weight of those who had seen the worst and still chosen kindness. Colonel Rhodes eventually returned to his post, but not before leaving a letter for the academy commander. A week later, new signs appeared above the serving line, engraved metal plaques that read, Dawson Station, in honor of service beyond the uniform. No ceremony was held, no speeches made, but every cadet stopped beneath it on their first day and stood for a moment, reading the inscription in silence. When Maya saw it for the first time, she said nothing. She just wiped her hands on her apron, took a deep breath, and went back to work, her expression unreadable except for the small, almost hidden smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. One evening near closing, Eli Brooks lingered behind after most had left. He approached her as she was stacking trays, hesitant but sincere. "Ma'am," he said, "I wanted to thank you for what you did back then and for what you do here now." Maya paused, her eyes softening. "You don't owe me thanks, cadet," she said. "But if you really mean it, then pay it forward. That's how soldiers keep each other alive, even when they're not on the battlefield anymore." Eli nodded, his voice quiet. "Yes, ma'am." He hesitated before adding, "Were you ever scared?" Back then, she looked past him for a long moment, the distant hum of memory flickering behind her gaze. "Of course," she said finally. "But courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are." That night, long after the cadets were asleep, Maya stayed behind to wipe down the counters. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound left in the room. She turned off the last light and looked up at the new plaque above her station. The metal caught the dim reflection of the emergency lights, glowing faintly in the dark. She reached up, touched the edge of it gently, and whispered, "For them." Then she left, her footsteps echoing softly down the empty corridor. In the weeks that followed, the story of the woman who saved a colonel became less of a tale and more of a lesson told to every new recruit. But Maya never claimed ownership of it. When people asked, she'd smile and say, "Heroes don't stay in one place. They just show up where they're needed." And she meant it, because while others saw her as a relic of war, she knew she was something else entirely, a quiet guardian, standing post where no one expected one. Months later, on Veterans Day, the Academy held its annual remembrance ceremony. The cadets assembled in formation across the courtyard, flags lowered, rifles glinting in the morning sun. Colonel Rhodes returned for the event, his uniform as sharp as ever, and when his speech began, he didn't speak about victory or command. He spoke about a woman who served pie in silence, about how leadership isn't in medals or titles, but in the way someone carries themselves when no one's watching. And when he finished, he turned toward the mess hall doors, where Maya stood quietly in the background, hands clasped in front of her, apron still dusted with flour. Without hesitation, he saluted her again. This time, the entire academy followed. Maya blinked, caught off guard, but didn't move for a moment. Then she gave a small nod and returned the salute. Quick, respectful, steady. When it was over, she slipped back inside, vanishing into the hum of the kitchen once more. No fanfare, no applause, just the quiet sound of a woman who had already given enough of herself to the world and still chose to give a little more. Years later, when new cadets would arrive at Jefferson, they'd be told about Dawson Station. They'd eat their first meal under that plaque and ask who she was. And someone older, maybe Eli, maybe one of his classmates, would tell them the truth. That she wasn't just a cook. That once, long ago, she saved a man who carried stars on his shoulders. And that now she saved everyone who walked through her line. One meal, one lesson in humility at a time. Maya never saw herself as a hero, but the academy never forgot her. Because long after the medals tarnish and the uniforms fade, courage still looks the same. It stands quietly in the corner, unseen, serving others without asking to be seen. And somewhere in the hum of that mess hall, with the smell of fresh pie in the air, it still feels like she's there, steady, watchful, and unbreakably kind.